Every year, about 10 million tons of paper winds up in American landfills and incinerators, which is not only wasteful but adds CO2 to the atmosphere. Recycling helps, but even that material has to be repulped and paperized before you can use it to print out that recipe you'll never make. But what if you could wipe the page clean and use it again? Light amplification by simulated emission of radiation to the rescue. A new study shows that laser light can erase the toner from a piece of printed paper. The approach appears in the Proceedings of the Royal Society A. Taking a page from the Art Restoration Handbook, scientists sampled a variety of light sources to see if any could be used to strip the ink from laser-printed documents without damaging or discoloring the paper. UV and infrared were too harsh. But a bright green laser applied in 4 nanosecond pulses vaporize the print, leaving paper that looks as good as new. Such imprinters will probably run about $30,000, so they probably will not catch on for home use. But people in the recycling world might find that the green laser fits the bill for making paper that's really green.
Finally, we take a look at how to mix and unmix liquids at the flick of a switch. Sandrine tells us more. Oil and water don't usually mix, but the new chemical sensitive to light has been added here to blend them together. When exposed to UV light, the chemical changes its structure and becomes soluble in water. This causes 2 layers to form, with the oil floating on top of the water-chemical combo. This method should be cheaper than the current alternative, which involves using high-energy centrifuges.
In his great novel, Remembrance of Things Past, or In Search of Lost Time, Marcel Proust explored what are called involuntary memories, those that come to us quite suddenly without conscious effort, usually triggered by one of the senses. The fact that his book has 2 titles in English might suggest there is some doubt as to how our minds go about remembering things. In perhaps the most well-known such episode in the novel, the character Marcel is reminded of his childhood by the aroma produced when dunking a cake in a cup of tea. This is not far away from the belief that as we get older, we can remember quite clearly incidents from years ago, but find it hard to remember what we did last week. Proust's insight into memory is certainly true of one way the mind works. But why and how do we remember what we do? Experts believe that we store memories in 3 ways. First, there is the sensory stage, which is to do with perception, and lasts only a fraction of a second, taking in sight, sound, touch, and so on. These first perceptions and sensations are then stored in the short-term memory, which is the second stage. Finally, important information, or information that has been reinforced by, for example, repetition, is then filtered into the long-term memory. Naturally, we tend to more easily absorb material on things we already know something about, as this has more meaning for us and can create a web of connections with related material that is already stored in the long-term memory.
How did I get into anthropology? Well, I'm not an anthropologist. Not trained in it anyway. In fact, I'm a marine biologist. And it's more that I'm interested in the strandlopers, the beach walkers, if you like, than in anthropology generally. In fact, it was through my early interest in all things to do with the sea that I first heard of them. As a kid, my favourite pastime was getting down to the beach and mucking about in rock pools and collecting anything the sea tossed up. And, The strandlopers lived off the sea and seashore, gathering food such as mussels, oysters, crabs and so on, just as I did. So when I heard of them, I thought, right, this is my kind of thing, and I felt a kind of, affinity for them. At first, people thought they were a myth, I suppose because there didn't seem to be much evidence for their existence. But now we do have archaeological evidence such as pottery, discarded shells, the bones of seals and large fish and so on. And those shells, we believe, became their first tools, and in some cases were also used as money and jewellery. Of course, before they had the implements, the tools to hunt and fish, everything had to be caught by hand, so they kept mostly to shallow water. Then they might have used a primitive form of fishing line, perhaps the tendril of a climbing plant or a strip of animal skin with a bone or small piece of wood that would stick in the fish's throat. Anyway, the more we search, the more we discover. Most recently, caves on the coast have been discovered with ancient drawings. I find it endlessly fascinating.
Emphysema and cystic fibrosis patients who need new lungs are faced with a life-threatening problem. More than 80% of donated lungs can't be used. They're inflamed and barely functional. But a new approach detailed this week in the new journal Science Translational Medicine describes a novel gene therapy that can repair these damaged lungs and make them available for transplant. Researchers first developed a system for preserving the lungs. They put the organs in a glass chamber and kept them functioning and at human body temperature. This technique proved better than freezing. Then they inserted into the lungs a gene called IL-10. The gene plays a key role in inhibiting the immune response. About 6 hours after injection, the cells start producing proteins that combat the damaging inflammation. The presence of the IL-10 gene may also lower the chances that the recipient of the lung will reject the transplanted organ. After the gene therapy, treated lungs showed improved blood flow and were significantly better at taking in oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. The technique could double the number of lungs available for transplant, truly making patients breathe easier. As many of us broil in August heat, the Mars rover Spirit is hunkered down to survive a far more brutal season, a Martian winter. Spirit's been on Mars since January 2004 and already survived previous winters, which run from May through November. With sunlight reaching Spirit at a weak angle, the rover hibernates and uses the scant solar power to recharge batteries and heat itself to minus 40 degrees. At least that's what happened in previous winters. This winter, the game little unit just doesn't have enough juice to keep its heaters on, so temperatures inside the rover will plunge to a frigid minus 67 degrees Fahrenheit. When NASA scientists began signaling Spirit on July 26th, they hoped to receive a communications beep back, but so far there's only silence. The researchers say that in about 2 months, sunlight will start to increase again through March 2011. If we haven't heard from Spirit by that point, then the likelihood is that we never will. The rover was designed to work on Mars for 3 months, but was mobile for more than 5 years. Now mission scientists wait through the Martian winter to see if this ET will phone home.
Readjusting to life in your own country after living abroad for some time is a little like recovering from jet lag after a long flight across several time zones. It takes time. And research indicates that after 9 years of living in a foreign country, you never really do readjust. Of course, things have changed. Governments have come and gone. What you knew as countryside has become a suburb. New technologies have changed the way people go about their daily lives, and so on. These changes may well have been taking place in your adopted country, but they were happening while you were there, so you could adapt as you went along. Those are not the main difficulties, however. It is in the smaller, everyday things that you might experience what is known as culture shock, although it's not really a shock, but puzzling all the same. For example, the precise way to behave at a supermarket checkout may have changed, and in ordinary conversation, the frames of reference have changed, and quite often you find that you don't really know what people are talking about, even though they are speaking your native tongue.
The earliest writers on politics, and I'm thinking of Plato and Aristotle here, felt free to draw insights from all areas of human knowledge, unlike modern academic writers who tend to put things into smaller and smaller compartments or focus more closely on one area of inquiry. For example, Plato would examine a whole political system and the philosophy that underlies it, whereas modern writers on politics might concentrate on one particular institution in that system, the House of Lords in England, or on voting patterns within a country. With this focus, the bigger questions that the ancients dealt with, what is the best form of government, or what is justice, tend to get left behind. Many writers on politics these days are university-based, and so have to have specialised interests. And while they may make new and interesting discoveries in their special field, it is at the loss of a broader perspective, not to mention the loss of a general audience or readership. In the 19th century, there were still writers who used the same freedom of inquiry as the ancients, and are all the more readable and relevant because of it.
The nature-nurture debate is still going on. It is not a question of taking sides because we know that both play an important part in what makes us who we are. It is more a question of emphasis. Which of them has the greatest influence? On the nature side, we have what we get from our genes, our inherited traits, eye color and other physical traits, for example, but also, some believe, non-physical ones, such as temperament. For example, you might be quick to anger, or have a nervous temperament, and this even extends to sense of humor. On the nurture side, there is what we get from our environment and our upbringing, what we learn. Research into the human genome has recently made it clear that both sides are partly right. Nature gives us inborn abilities and traits, while nurture takes these genetic tendencies and shapes them as we grow and learn and mature. This is an important point, as it means, contrary to the belief of some, that we are not wholly determined by our genes. Scientists have known for years that eye and hair color are determined by specific genes, but some now claim that such traits as intelligence and personality are also encoded in our genes.
To the beginning of the talk.
Now that the warmer weather and longer days are here, we aren't the only ones spending more time outdoors. This is an active time for bats as well. Migratory bats are now returning to the area, and young bats are starting to explore their environment. Young bats go off course, and this is when most people come into contact with them. Bats are a normal part of our environment and can even be a good thing. Bats help keep down the insect population, especially mosquitoes. Normal bat activity includes sleeping during the daytime and becoming active and flying around in search of food at night, starting at dusk. It's unusual to see a bat during the day. Normal bats don't fly around in the daytime or lie or crawl on the ground. So if you encounter a bat like that, you should call the health department immediately. If you have bats in your attic or house, contact a pest control agency. They do not kill the bats, but make recommendations on how to get the bats out of your home. You'll want to create a one-way valve from your house to outside so they can get out but can't come in. To avoid having bats in your house altogether, find all possible entry points into the house and close them by caulking or screening the gap. Bats can squeeze through a gap of 1/2 inch. Bats are the most likely carriers of rabies in our area, and almost 100% of rabies cases are fatal. Make sure your dogs and cats are vaccinated against rabies. If you should come in physical contact with a bat, it's important to get in touch with the health department or a doctor immediately. If possible, catch the bat so it can be tested for rabies.
Number 7.